The curtain is fully up now, though, on the allegations against Deshaun Watson. And I've been very critical of Tony Buzbee in the past. And frankly, he behaved today the way he should have behaved from the get-go. It should never have been about him. It always should have been about the victims. And it took him 3 weeks to find his footing, unless, and I don't rule this out, unless he was engaged in some sort of a rope-a-dope strategy, which has been effective because it seems like he draws out reactions from Deshaun Watson's camp that then get turned back against them, and that's part of what happened today. But Buzbee was accompanied by several different people, but the most significant person who was there, a woman by the name of Ashley Solis, who was the first one who sued Watson 3 weeks ago today, exercising her privilege to proceed under a pseudonym. She now has decided to make her identity known. She's spoken with police. We know who she is. And she spoke today, reading from a statement during that press conference. Here is some of what Ashley Solis had to say.
I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. I do exist. I'm here to take back the power and take back control. I am a survivor of assault and harassment. Deshaun Watson is my assaulter and my harasser. Deshaun Watson assaulted and harassed me on March 30th, 2020, in my own home, doing what I love most, massage therapy.
There was plenty more there, and we have a story at PFT with some other quotes from Ashley Solis. And when you hear the story told, and again, these are allegations. Deshaun Watson is entitled to all of his rights, civil justice, criminal justice, whatever. When the person attaches her name to it, face, voice, tells the story, it takes on a far different vibe, a far different feeling, a far different level of gravity than when it is just the lawyer who is having the press conference and talking in the way that lawyers tend to talk. So I think this did get everyone's attention who's been paying attention to the story. It should have gotten everyone's attention, and it definitely should get the attention of Deshaun Watson and the people advising him, because to me, Charean, even though it's only been 3 weeks, it feels like it's been around a lot longer than that. Today is the day that it became extremely serious as it relates to individuals who are pursuing justice through the civil system and also now some of them through the criminal system against Deshaun Watson.
You know, in his career, Mike, Deshaun Watson has 27 losses, including 2 in the postseason. Perhaps the biggest of that is against the Chiefs in the postseason 2 years ago. This today was the biggest loss for Deshaun Watson. I don't know how much of that statement that Ashley Solis wrote herself. It doesn't matter. It was powerful. It was compelling. It was an emotional. If I'm sitting on that jury, she was completely believable to me. And when she kept saying, I'm Ashley Solis, remember the name, I still have chills. And he has a huge uphill battle. If he didn't do this, I don't know how you prove that you didn't do it based on what she said today. I just thought it was extremely powerful, Mike. And she was believable, I thought.
And she is one of 22. Tony Buzbee said there are 5 others that they evaluated and thought they could not make out a case on their behalf. The problem was, from Busbee's perspective, and this was the reaction of somebody trying to be open-minded and fair to all sides involved, all parties involved, as more and more individuals sued under the Jane Doe pseudonym, and they were all represented by Tony Buzbee, and Buzbee was doing the things he was doing, the antics he was engaged in that made him the lightning rod for controversy and criticism. It was just getting to a point where the circumstances cried out for more. And again, it's possible he is a next-level genius, and this was the way he always intended it to go, but this is the way it always should have been. It should be the individual. And it's not something that we should expect someone to do. I think part of what Buzbee also tried to do today through other individuals who were present and spoke briefly at the press conference, get people to understand why individuals don't go immediately to the authorities, why they choose the civil courts, why they don't want to attach their names and faces, because you do open yourself up to the criticism, the reaction, the negativity that necessarily flows from anything like this, in anything that goes on in today's climate where you can be spoken to via social media in a very direct and open and hostile way. She became the first to decide to speak in her voice, present at the press conference. Another individual named Lauren Baxley has allowed herself to be disclosed. She wrote a letter to Deshaun Watson that was read by one of Tony Buzbee's colleagues. And one of the things Buzbee said near the end, hey, this may prompt some of the other individuals who are suing Deshaun Watson to do the same. There's strength in numbers. You see that if one comes forward, you see what the reaction is, and you realize it's okay, and it actually may be part of the healing process for the people who believe they've been through this kind of trauma. So there could be more. And all it takes is one. That's the thing. All it takes is one. And I found Ashley Solis credible. I found it compelling. And it humanizes allegations that otherwise had been made anonymously, to the point where that was one of Rusty Hardin's top arguments, Charean, on behalf of Deshaun Watson. And it seemed to be working to a certain extent. When you release 18 statements from massage therapists on the record with their names, it juxtaposes against 22 where you don't know who any of them are. And it does allow for, to the extent that Hardin's trying to represent Watson, it does allow for that pushback. Who are these people? Who are these people? And I think at a certain level today, Buzbee's unspoken message to Rusty Hardin and Deshaun Watson was, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, Mike, before today, Tony Buzbee was the face of these lawsuits. He was the name behind these lawsuits. There were no other names. There were no other faces. Today, we got a face and we got a name. And she said, my name is Ashley Solis. Remember the name. And I think that humanized it. It put everything in perspective that these lawsuits are about. And I just thought it was huge. And how you defend against that, you're the lawyer, but I don't know now what your next step is if you're Rusty Hardin, because to me, this has become very problematic for them, because we have names, 2 names at least, and we have faces. And as you said, it only takes to prove one of these, right? And he's in a world of hurt. You said yesterday, Mike, that we have to acknowledge at least that there's a possibility that Deshaun Watson will never play again in the NFL. Yesterday, I was thinking after you said that, I'm saying, yeah, okay, yeah, we have to acknowledge it, but there's no possible way. Everybody gets a second chance in the NFL. After hearing what I heard today, I think there's a very real possibility that Deshaun Watson never plays another down in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree with you, Charean. And again, this is just the first of 22 stories that eventually will be told in civil court, potentially in criminal court, depending upon whether and to what extent a prosecutor goes forward. But the reason I said what I said yesterday, even though the standard of proof is extremely high in criminal court, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, we saw 26 years ago what that means in the context of O.J. Simpson, how difficult it can be to avoid creating any amount of reasonable doubt that would avoid a conviction. But if Ashley Solis tells a compelling story to a prosecutor, and that prosecutor decides, I'll just let her tell her story. I'll let her tell her story. Where's the reasonable doubt in her story? Now, that story will be subject to rigorous cross-examination. That's part of the right of confrontation that every criminal defendant has. But if you believe that that story will come out of that rigorous cross-examination unscathed, and then Deshaun Watson exercises his Fifth Amendment right to not testify, maybe you have overcome the very high standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's when Deshaun Watson has to worry about not playing, not because the league has given him a lifetime ban, but because for the remainder of his life that he otherwise would be young enough and healthy enough to play football, he's going to be behind bars, depending upon some of these claims. Now, The Ashley Solis claims, I don't know, and I haven't researched the Texas laws as to what level of crime, misdemeanor, felony, et cetera. Some of the allegations made in the 22 lawsuits, if made in a criminal setting, if ultimately accepted by a jury, if regarded as being sufficient proof beyond a reasonable doubt of criminal misconduct, could result in lengthy prison stays for Deshaun Watson. That's why I said what I said. We just don't know at this point. And now, for the first time, there is that human element other than the lawyer, which never is regarded as the human element. After practicing for 18 years, I can acknowledge that. We're not the people who were directly involved. We have a job to do. When you hear from the people directly involved, Charean, that's when it all changes. And I think that for the league, for the Texans, for Deshaun Watson, for everyone involved, it all changed today. And I hope that everyone paying attention to the story will watch the press conference. It's readily available on YouTube. Watch it. It's worth your time to the extent that you're going to have any reaction or any thought or any discussion, privately, publicly, wherever. You need to be informed, and you need to have that human reaction that I think we all had when we heard her story. And it almost,
yeah, no
Charean,
question.
and look, we're going to talk. We're going to talk later. I'm sorry, just let me add one thing. We're going to talk later about the initial reaction from Rusty Hardin, but thinking about this now as we talk it through, it almost compels Deshaun Watson to tell his story publicly now. That's the only way that this even gets back to a point where we feel like it's even again. If that's, I mean, we know whatever happened, and somebody's going to figure out what happened. But I feel like from the standpoint of how we all have reacted reasonably to what we heard today, I feel like we need to hear from Deshaun Watson and see him and hear his story in order to assess what we are expected to or able to process and believe at this point, if that makes any sense at all.
It does, Mike. And you go back to what Rusty Hardin put out last week from the women who spoke on the record. They didn't dispute much of what these other women are saying happened, right? I mean, we know. I mean, they've confirmed that he had a ton of massages from different people. Some of them found off of Instagram. Some of them were recommended from other people, whatever. But those statements, to me, confirm much of what we've heard from these women who are actually suing Deshaun Watson. Now, whether they had different experiences or whatever the case may be, as you have said repeatedly, all 40 of these women, I think that's the number now. I keep forgetting the number. It's probably over 40 now. I think it's 42 possibly now. But all of these women, it's possible that they're all telling the truth, as you've said, Mike. But that's problematic because you have these 22 women who are suing him, and now we've heard the story from them. One thing I think is really different about this, you talked about the reason women don't want to come forward in these cases, and it's true. I mean, the criticism that, especially when it's against an athlete, the criticism, right, the negativity, the hostile environment it puts these women in publicly once their name is attached with something like this. But what's different about this is I think Texans fans, many of them had already moved on from Deshaun Watson because he wanted to be traded out of Houston. So that's what's different, I think, in this is I don't know how much these women are going to be facing hostility from Texans fans that they might otherwise have if Deshaun Watson is absolutely beloved in Houston, because he's not. And I think now, in many people's eyes, he's turned into a villain, and it's up to Rusty Hardin and Deshaun Watson to figure out how to swing this back in their favor. And they got a long way to go to figure out how to do that, Mike.
You mentioned the 18 individuals last week who attached names to their statements. Now, some of those individuals did take what I thought were gratuitous shots at the plaintiffs and the credibility of their claims without having any facts other than he never did anything untoward or improper to me. Tony Busby took aim at one of the 18 individuals who were on the record last week because Busby contends he's obtained evidence of social media direct messages that would undercut the version that was provided last week. Let's hear from Tony Busby, the B clip where he talks about the evidence that they have compiled relating to one of the 18 women who spoke out last week.
Packet number. One of these individuals that was released said, I've been providing massage therapy to Deshaun in 2018 and massaged him at least 40 times since then. I've never had a single uncomfortable or inappropriate experience with Deshaun. That was the statement that was released. Well, let me read to you the direct message that this individual sent that we now have a copy of. I told you I stopped working with him. Yeah, why? Because I was hearing too much stuff about him messing with other people, like other therapists and estheticians. He's been doing a lot the last 3 or 4 months. I even told his ass he needed to be careful because his name getting around. I just hope don't nobody call me to question me. That's 2 different stories.
That's definitely 2 different stories. And based upon the statements that were issued last week, he was quoting from an individual named Jazz Brooks, and she will be hearing from somebody. Houston police, Tony Busby, someone serving her a subpoena. At some point, she's going to have some questions to answer about what she said in that direct message, assuming that what Tony Busby's telling us is 100% accurate. I don't want to just treat it as gospel truth, but I doubt that he would have been making those statements in an open forum today, Charean, if he wasn't pretty damn certain that they have the messages from this same person saying those things. So, yeah, he didn't do it to me, but somebody who's in the massage therapy industry, hearing about it to the point where she said something to him about it, he better watch himself. You know, that's the flip side of this problem. When you go out and find 18 people who are supporting your cause, you better be damn sure that all 18 of those people are going to be able to withstand rigorous questioning, because if Tony Busby can start flipping them into witnesses for him, that's when you got an even larger problem than you had going in, Charean.
Yeah, no question about it, Mike. And we've seen presumably one of the 18 flips. So, you know, they're going to be digging into the other 17 to figure out when and where and why and how and exactly what happened. So there's going to be, this thing's going to drag out for a long time, Mike, and it's not going to end anytime soon. And it's Deshaun Watson is going to face a lot more pressure in this over the next few months, and it's getting hotter and hotter by the day. And if you're a lawyer, Mike, what's your next move? Is it Deshaun Watson telling his story?
I don't know. I really don't. I want to have a little bit of a chance to process the Rusty Hardin statement before we talk about it after our first break. I have a feeling that the statement that was issued by Rusty Hardin is probably not something I would have done. I mean, my feeling for the last 2 weeks has been you need to find a way to resolve these matters to the satisfaction of everyone involved. So the individuals feel like they've been heard. Deshaun Watson feels like he's had a chance to be heard. The end result is satisfactory to everyone involved. It may be too late for that now. Today may be the day that the bridge was crossed, and these cases just have to play themselves out for a while. There may be an appropriate time to try to resolve one, more, or all of the cases later. But look, anything you say can and will be used against you. That's just not the Miranda warnings. That's reality. Anything a defendant in a civil case or a criminal case says publicly, those words can be repeated in court. You say it privately, those words can be repeated in court. Hearsay, you know, if you know anything about hearsay, well, I said it out of court. Well, it doesn't matter if it's the person who's accused, if the person who's sued, the person who's on trial. Anything they say anywhere can be used against them. So if he would give a press conference, everything he says there could be picked apart and used against him later in a search for inconsistencies. Lawyers are always looking for inconsistencies because the existence of inconsistencies will demean the credibility of the person who is telling the story. And that's a little glimmer of what we're going to talk about as it relates to Hardin's statement, the search for inconsistencies in the stories that are told. Before we get to that, though, the NFL's comment on this matter, we reached out to them immediately after the press conference ended. Said Brian McCarthy, NFL spokesman, the allegations are deeply disturbing and we take these issues very seriously. Immediately following news of the first allegations last month, as has been reported, we initiated an investigation under the NFL's personal conduct policy. We're continuing to closely monitor all developments in the matter. You may recall Busby actually posted on social media the letter that he got from Lisa Friel, who's in charge of these issues, these matters, these investigations for the NFL. And we're told that the league has been in contact with Busby. And the request from the league was to have cooperation from these individuals. So if Ashley Solis tells her story to Lisa Fria or anyone else at the NFL, if these other individuals tell their story to the NFL, that increases the likelihood that the NFL will take action. And frankly, Charean, based upon today's developments, I think there's no way the league can avoid putting Deshaun Watson on the commissioner exempt list. Paid leave. And usually the league would say in the offseason there's nothing to put him on paid leave from. There's no football going on. Yeah. Let's wait until we have to do it. I think this is, and it's only been around 7 years, this concept of paid leave. I think this is the first occasion where the offseason issue has gotten so significant that they just need to do it now. So they send a message to anyone who's paying attention that they are engaged and they get it.
Yeah, he's not getting paid for anything right now. Like, they only get paid during the season, so he's not getting paid. But I do think it sends a message, Mike, like you said, and I think it's important for the NFL to do this, to put him on the commissioner exempt list. And he'll stay on there until they decide he's coming off, which probably means when the investigation over. And I find it highly likely that he's not going to play during 2021. I just don't think that's going to be possible. So he'll probably remain on that list for the entire season, as he should, based on this, unless he can somehow get this cleared up in some way before the start of the season, which just doesn't seem possible.
And I can't imagine that happening. I just can't imagine it happening. And, I'll leave it for another time to talk about the financial ramifications of the NFL doing something now versus doing something later. But I just think from the standpoint of what's right and what's wrong, and in order to send a message to everyone out there who regards these issues as important, as we all should, I just think taking the position of it's not football season, so there's nothing for us to do, I don't think that's going to fly. And I think they are going to need to do something sooner rather than later as it relates to Deshaun Watson. Lauren Baxley is the other individual who became known to us today. She was not ready to meet reporters, and I can imagine how intimidating it must be to be in that setting and speaking and being scrutinized and being studied, and then it ends up on YouTube and social media. She wrote a letter that was provided to Tony Busby, and he had one of his colleagues read the letter during the press conference. Here's some of what Lauren Baxley had to say via one of the lawyers working for the Busby law firm.
How can such a good man do such terrible things, and with frequency and total disregard for his abuse victims? You are not a good man. Anything good that you have done is poisoned by your true nature. Maybe you suffered abuse yourself in the past, and maybe you have genuinely attempted to convince yourself as much as us, your victims, and the general public that you are without fault. Maybe you need intensive and professional long-term help. But that does not humanize you or the terrors you have inflicted upon countless powerless women. I have written this upon the recommendation of my trauma therapist to forgive myself for not speaking up sooner, to forgive myself for not being braver. But I have also written this so that you can know, without excuse or justification, that you have deeply and irreversibly brought terror to me and others.
Again, that was not Lauren Baxley, but that was her letter to Deshaun Watson that she has written as part of her. Part of that reminded me of one of the comments from Ashley Solis that really resonated with me when she said, we were all deceived into thinking Deshaun Watson was a good guy, and unfortunately we know that good guys can do terrible things. So to summarize, 2 individuals now of the 22 have made their names known. Whether that results in more remains to be seen, Charean, but everything changes once we see the names, once we hear the words directly from the individuals, and in the case of Ashley Solis, once we have an opportunity to hear her deliver her story about what occurred.
And we're up to 2, right? Who have filed criminal charges away from Tony Busby. Tony Busby hasn't done it, but 2 women have filed criminal charges, right, with the Houston Police Department as well, Mike.
Ashley Solis went to the police without Busby's involvement. Remember, there was that weird angle last week that Busby was coming up with a bizarre reason for not going to the Houston police, and that was his biggest misstep of the last 3 weeks, because that was not credible. It made no sense, and it set the stage for the attack that he ended up enduring from Rusty Hardin in the court of public opinion. But Ashley Solis, another individual, maybe one more, have spoken to police so far, and justice can be pursued in two primary ways: criminal and civil. And these individuals have every right, within the appropriate statute of limitations, to wait and file suit. It's 2 years in most jurisdictions for something like this. You can wait all the way up until the 2-year anniversary and then file suit. And that doesn't say anything about whether your case has merit or doesn't. And then the criminal side is something else that can be pursued, and that's what's happening. Now, on the civil side, this is where it gets interesting as it relates to the Texans, and potentially expensive as it relates to the Texans. Because when Busby had a chance to speak today, and good lawyers know how to just sprinkle the ideas out there and hope that people in the media will catch on to what it is that they're saying. I think Busby, Charean, is going to explore very carefully whether and to what extent the Texans knew or should have known that Watson was engaging in inappropriate conduct via this vast array of private massages when he had at his disposal a massage anytime he wanted one for sports reasons from the Texans facility. And Busby said that there were referrals to massage therapists made by members of the Texans organization. There was equipment that was used by Deshaun Watson. And Busby planted the seed that and raised the very important question: at what point, as an organization, do you have an obligation to ask questions about what's going on here? Here's some of Busby on that point.
Packet number 2, and these are all arranged that way, and we'll put them online that way as well. Package number 2 is where Deshaun Watson reaches out to a woman in Atlanta, Georgia, while he's in Houston. Hear what I'm saying. He reaches out to a woman via direct message on Instagram who's located in Atlanta, Georgia. He does this while he's in Houston. He asks her for a massage. He tells her he'll fly her in. He buys her a plane ticket. He arranges for her Uber from the airport. He Ubers her to the Houstonian. She says, I don't have a table. I'm not bringing a table with me. He says, I'll borrow one from the team. He borrows a table from the Houston Texans. He does this many different times in these massage instances. In some cases, he asks them, can you just massage me on the bed? When they insist on a table, he borrows it from the Houston Texans. In some of these instances, we know that it was personnel from the Houston Texans who made the referral, who helped him arrange the massage.
And again, Busby eventually said, even though he's not commenting on what the Texans knew and when they knew it, you have some obligation to ask some questions at some point as these things are happening. Now, what Busby was also doing there, Charean, talking about bringing someone in from Georgia to Texas, setting up the potential for a violation of trafficking laws and potential federal criminal involvement to the extent that there were individuals brought in from other states by Deshaun Watson. That's another angle and another direction this can go, and he's clearly trying to establish that.
Yeah, though he didn't take many questions, Mike, and there were only a couple at the end, but those were the two questions. One was about trafficking, and I think we have 4 states now that are involved in this. And the second question was, what did the Texans know and when did they know it? And that's when he answered, he doesn't know at this point, but is going to find out. 2 very good questions from the Houston press corps there. Veteran news reporters were there, but he didn't take a whole lot of questions, but I thought those were 2 very good questions to ask at the end of that press conference.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.